Yeah, good evening, everyone. Today I will be taking on parathyroid glands, surgical diseases of parathyroid glands. For undergraduates, clinically, I don't know how many of you, whatever the specialty you choose clinically, how often you will come across the surgical diseases pertaining to parathyroid. Definitely few of you, if you become surgeons, more so endocrine surgeons, you will come across some surgical diseases pertaining to parathyroid. But as a theoretical aspect, definitely you may be asked the examination, both in theory and practical examinations. Even then, keeping that examination part apart, if you can have an idea about how do these parathyroid glands are important in the body and how do they are important as far as surgical diseases are concerned, how do these small tiny glands which are unnoticed in the body are important to create a disease or to maintain normal metabolism in the body. So at least for that sake, if you can know about parathyroid glands, it will be a great the surgical knowledge one can have in our specialty. I had mentioned in my first class of the anatomy of thyroid, the development of thyroid and parathyroid, which go hand in hand. There are few anatomical points which are really important for management of parathyroid disorders, one. And there are few important anatomical points which are really important in your competitive examinations. Even though theoretically you may not see many cases in your clinical practice, but definitely there will be one or two questions in your competitive examinations on parathyroid glands. So I insist that all of you should concentrate on this topic, and I insist that after this class, you should go back and read pertaining to parathyroid gland, two books which I insist. One, the McGregor Surgical Anatomy, second, Bailey and Love. So if you can go into these books, these two books after this class, probably you will do better in your competitive examinations. Somebody has raised hand. Audio is not good. Sharath has raised hands. Okay, there are two parathyroid glands on either side. Totally, we have four, superior and inferior, what commonly they are named. To add to this, there can be accessory parathyroid glands. There can be more in number, and very rarely there can be less in number. Superior parathyroid is fixed in position most often. They are fixed, like their position is definite. If you see into this photograph, this picture, most of them, even though it is called superior, they are less likely to be near the superior pole. They are almost at the middle of the gland, where the inferior thyroid artery and the recurrent laryngeal nerve meets the thyroid gland almost near the Berry's ligament. That is a commonest site for superior parathyroid gland. Don't get confused. I'm very clear when I speak. I'm very clear with my pictures, because these are the ones which will be asked as MCQs for your competitive examinations. So the commonest position for superior parathyroid gland is this point, not the superior pole. So if you look into the percentage of here, so next commonest will be the superior pole. Next comes paraesophageal area, or it can be in the carotid sheath, and rarely it can be in the intrathyroid position, maybe within the substance of the thyroid gland. Coming to the inferior parathyroids, commonly they are located over the pole. So if the question is asked, which is the gland which is nearer to one of the poles of thyroid gland, it is an inferior parathyroid gland which has got a relation with the thyroid pole. Okay, it is almost near, more than 50% of cases, they are related to the lower pole of the gland. Then the next commonest, these parathyroid glands develop from the thyrothymic tract. They may descend all along the thyrothymic tract. This is the thyroid, means thyroid and the thymus, both of them have developed from the single entity, that is thyroglossal tract, which starts from the base of the tongue or foramina cecum. So since thymus develops from the same structure, it may have, and this inferior parathyroid from the third branchial arch. So it may descend all along with this. It may be along the thyrothymic tract, or it can be in the mediastinum. So this is because of the developmental entity. So next to the commonest site, that is inferior pole, it can be along the thyrothymic tract, next commonest variety. If you look into the intrathyroid portion, if you look into the intrathyroid entity, it is more common with inferior parathyroid than superior parathyroid. This is 1%, this is 2%. Means, which is the gland which is commonly can have an intrathyroid position for parathyroid, it is an inferior parathyroid gland. Which is a gland which has got a relation with thyrothymic ligament, it is an inferior parathyroid gland. Other than this, answering MCQs in your competitive examinations, why we should know positions of parathyroid in relation with the disease per se is there is an entity called ectopic parathyroid glands, means other than their normal positions, fixed positions. This is important whenever there is a case of the disease involving parathyroid gland resulting in hypercalcemia or hyperparathyroidism, which I am going to deal. If normally placed parathyroid glands are looking normal on imaging, you have to find out maybe somewhere else, that is ectopic site, for a functioning parathyroid gland, and that gland has to be removed. So that is the importance of knowing ectopic sites of parathyroid. If it is the question is asked, which is the gland which is known for ectopic site, it is an inferior parathyroid gland is known for ectopic site. The normally positioned parathyroid, they are called topic parathyroids, T-O-P-I-C, topic parathyroids. Okay, so that is normally placed parathyroid. So ectopic is other than the topic position. So superior parathyroid glands, more than 50% of the cases, they are topic in position. Most often for ectopic position, it is the inferior parathyroid which is commonly involved. Before we go into the diseases of parathyroid gland, we should know that parathyroid hormone secreted by these glands, it is directly related with calcium metabolism. Excessive hormone will cause increased calcium levels. How does it result in increased calcium levels? So if you look into this simple flow chart, these are the glands which releases parathyroid hormone, PTH. This is the parathyroid hormone, PTH. This will cause increased calcium. How does it cause? First is there will be demineralization of the bone, means there will be release of calcium from the bone, demineralization. They become osteoporotic, they become weak because excessive calcium is mobilized from the skeletal system into the circulation. So demineralization. Then second action of this hormone is increased absorption of this calcium from renal tubules. Increased absorption in exchange with phosphorus. Also, this increased absorption will increase the serum vitamin D level, or activation of the vitamin D. Vitamin D is known for calcium absorption from the intestine. So all of this will result in increased calcium level. And once the calcium is increased, it has got a feedback mechanism. It will affect on the parathyroid gland and decreases the hormone secretion. Okay, this is a simple flow chart so that you will understand the disease per se. After understanding this, To give a simple, what I mentioned just now, parathyroid hormone, please remember it has got important actions at 3 places. 1, bone. 2nd, kidney. 3rd, intestine. I'm drawing this diagram again because once I come back to the disease per se, that is hyperparathyroidism, again these 3 entities are important. This is where the parathyroid hormone acts and results in symptomatology. So that is why it is better to remember these 3 organs. The 4th one, which may not take part in increased calcium levels, but it can have an effect, that is central nervous system. Otherwise, parathyroid hormone like thyroxine, it can act on any organs, but these are the important. In one more terminal stage, that is called crisis, parathyroid crisis, where there is an optimal raise in parathyroid hormone. There can be involvement of CVS system. Just remember at this point of time, these are the 5 entities which are really important. The first 3 entities are important for the pathogenesis or the calcium, and second, also they give rise to some symptomatology. So that is why this is important to remember these 3 organs. Again, I have shown this here just to evaluate again with a photograph. This is the bone, this is the kidney, this is the intestine, ultimately resulting in increased calcium levels. Now coming to the topic proper, that is primary hyperparathyroidism. Please remember, primary means involving the gland itself, because there is an entity called secondary hyperparathyroidism, wherein the glands may be normal, but patient can have a scenario of hyperparathyroidism secondary to some other diseases, which I'll put 1 or 2 slides and I'll enlighten you. So coming to the primary hyperparathyroidism, in other words, this also can be asked in the form of MCQs for your level. This is otherwise known as, it is a disease of bones, stones, abdominal groans, and psychic moans. In other words, hyperparathyroidism secondary to the primary disease of parathyroid glands, that is otherwise called primary hyperparathyroidism. It basically involves the bones, results in stone formation, results in some abdominal problems or abdominal pain, and results in some psychiatric symptomatology. That is why this is termed under this terminology, primary hyperparathyroidism. This can be asked in your competitive examinations. What is this? What is hyperparathyroidism? I have defined here. It is primarily because of defined as hypercalcemia. These patients invariably will have hypercalcemia in presence of unsuppressed or relatively or absolutely elevated parathyroid hormones. Means these patients primary is hypercalcemia, and one more component is elevated parathyroid hormone levels. So in other words, primary hyperparathyroidism means patient should have hypercalcemia with raised parathyroid hormone levels. That we label it as primary hyperparathyroidism. The incidence prevalence is around 0.2 to 0.05. These are majority are sporadic in nature. There are only few entities which can be familial in the form of men type 1 and type 2A syndrome, which I have mentioned in the previous class. So it can be a component of type 1 and type 2A men syndrome, hyperparathyroidism. Usually these patients present in a elderly, like 5th or 6th decade, and predominantly they occur in females in the ratio of 3:1. So you can have MCQs on any of these items, So commonest variety is a sporadic variety of primary hyperparathyroidism. Not very high incidence. Postmenopausals are commonly involved. Like I mentioned, it occurs in an elderly patients. Please remember, even though I said it is primarily involvement of parathyroid glands, most often involvement is in the form of adenoma. Even though there are 4 glands, it is only the one gland which is commonly involved in the form of a small tumor. We call it as adenoma. So the question is, what is the commonest cause for primary hyperparathyroidism? It is a parathyroid adenoma involving a single gland. In such a scenario, that gland, we call it as a culprit gland. Culprit. It is a culprit. So it is a approved case of primary hyperparathyroidism if there is a single gland with the adenoma resulting in all the symptomatology of hyperparathyroidism. That gland is called as a culprit gland. So it is a parathyroid adenoma. That is a commonest cause. The same tumors which I mentioned, adenoma, can be in more number. Instead of involving only one gland, there can be involvement of 2 or 3 glands. That is called multiple adenomas. So that is also important, multiple adenomas. Sometimes this entity may not be because of the well-localized tumor in a gland. It could be because of the hyperplasia of all the 4 glands. That is called all 4 gland hyperplasia. There is no well-defined tumor, but 4 gland is enlarged. This hyperplasia may be limited to 1 gland or multiple glands. Okay, that is also known entity. This is called all 4 gland hyperplasia. Sometimes malignancy in a parathyroid gland can result in hyperparathyroidism. That amounts to around 2%. That is parathyroid carcinoma as a cause for primary hyperparathyroidism. Okay, in a familial variety, it could be a Menn syndrome resulting in hyperparathyroidism. In other words, what I mentioned just now, the commonest cause for primary hyperparathyroidism is parathyroid adenoma. Invariably, it is a single gland adenoma. The next commonest could be the multiple adenomas. It's a hyperplasia of the gland. Multiple gland hyperplasia. Then comes carcinoma. Then as a familial variety. Menn syndrome may be a component. Okay, please remember this, because this is the one which is we are going to mention again during imaging. Why you should know all this is, depending on this, you are imaging the patient and you are taking the decision for treatment. Depending on this, you will be taking the decision. Coming to the symptomatology of this. Like I mentioned, it is the disease of bones, intestinal cramps, and psychic wounds. So important point is the skeletal involvement, skeletal system involvement. Here, because there is a demineralization, because the calcium is taken out calcium is taken out from the skeletal system, they become weak. So patient may present with the features of pain, skeletal pain, or he may sometimes present with pathological fractures because of demineralization. Second is renal manifestation. The commonest renal manifestation pertaining to this is stone formation. Stones formation means if a patient presents to us with bilateral, multiple, huge size kidney stones or ureteric stones or bladder stones, keep a possibility of hyperparathyroidism in mind. Okay, or in spite of any intervention by a urologist, person is going to develop recurrent stone disease or urolithiasis, keep a possibility and accordingly you should evaluate. So depending on that, patient can have renal colic or he can have a diuresis. Okay, or there can be history of passage of small stones through the urine. So there could be this history. The gastrointestinal symptoms, the routine gastrointestinal symptoms, not very specific to the disease, but if a patient has developed chronic pancreatitis in the form of chronic pancreatitis, where there is a stone formation in the pancreatic duct or in the mucosa or in the parenchyma, resulting in chronic pancreatitis, keep a possibility of hyperparathyroidism. There can have a psychiatric illness. So there are various types of CNS involvement, but sometimes it is mentioned in the literature that these patients may present to a psychiatrist. They may present to a psychiatrist. In fact, in my practice, I had a patient, very young, beautiful girl, who went to a psychiatrist. Even ECTs were given. She was diagnosed to have a psychiatric illness. Later, we could diagnose that she had a hyperparathyroidism with a parathyroid adenoma, and treating surgically, she became all right. So they can be consulting psychiatrist. So keep that possibility. And I said the cardiovascular involvement is more common in severe hypercalcemia. Severe hypercalcemia. Again, what I mentioned just now, gastrointestinal, it could be anything. There is nothing specific. But if it is a chronic pancreatitis in an elderly patient, keep a possibility. Along with, if there are renal stones, along with chronic pancreatitis, this combination really strong evidence clinically that probably it's a case of hyperparathyroidism and needs to be investigated. Patient can have a peptic ulcer disease because there is an increased calcium level. Calcium is one of the component or element required to have acid secretion in the stomach. So there can be excessive acid secretion and patient may have a peptic ulcer disease. This we predict whenever we do endoscopy for a suspected peptic ulcer disease. If the ulcers are found in unusual sites, like multiple ulcers in the stomach or multiple ulcers in the second or third part of the duodenum, or patient is a known case of peptic ulcer disease and not getting relieved with treatment, medical line of treatment, keep a possibility and we have to evaluate. So patient can present with peptic ulcer disease. I am highlighting these gastrointestinal symptoms in parathyroid because in your competitive examination, they may give a case scenario. They may give a case scenario regarding all this symptomatology and they will give probable diagnosis lower down. So keep this possibility and evaluate the patient. I mentioned cardiovascular, it is more common because by the time patient will have symptomatology and he visits a clinician and it should have been already diagnosed. So very rarely, if it goes beyond 16, which I'm going to mention what are the calcium levels. So if it is goes very high levels, then a person may develop cardiovascular symptomatology in the form of all ECG changes, and they may have a cardiac arrest or systole, or they may have some block or ischemic signs. Again, to picturize what are all the diseases or what are all the organs which can be involved by hyperparathyroidism. On clinical examination, there may not be any clinically examination positive signs except the symptomatology. It is a disease of symptomatology. It is a disease of symptomatology and it is a disease which we are going to diagnose by investigations. So not by clinical examination. That doesn't mean that you should not. Eliciting good history and suspecting some disease is also a clinical diagnosis. Okay, unless you suspect by history, you cannot investigate. So even though on clinical examination, there are no signs found, specific signs, but history that will lead us to go for investigations. This primary hyperparathyroidism is diagnosed with this. The first is the serum calcium levels. What I said just now, the primary criteria is the increased calcium levels. Increased calcium levels. So normal level is, please remember, this also will be asked, 9 to 10.5 milligram per cell. In a given patient, if the calcium level is more than 1 milligram of the upper limit, then keep a possibility of hyperparathyroidism. Means, in other words, in a given patient, if it is 11.5, yeah, keep a possibility and get the investigation. So upper limit of normal is 10.5 milligrams. Each of this will be divided into two parts, that is bound and unbound form, because of the albumin binding with calcium with the albumin. So 50-50%. I mentioned one point here, which probably, yes, definitely it will help you for your examinations. Each gram of albumin in the circulation will bind 0.8 milligram of calcium. This information is important to calculate something called corrected serum calcium level. Corrected serum calcium level. This is more important than the just serum calcium levels. What is that corrected? It depends on the albumin level in that particular patient. This is the formula. That is, each gram of albumin will bind with a 0.8 milligram of calcium. With that, so find out what is the serum calcium of that given patient plus 0.8 into what is the normal serum albumin. That is 4 is taken as normal, and find out what is the albumin level in that given patient. Minus it. So 0.8 into this plus the serum calcium of that patient. So that will give the corrected serum calcium level. That is more important than just serum calcium. Along with this, if the patient has got raised parathyroid hormone, the normal level is up to 60 picograms per ml. So if the parathyroid hormone is raised and a person has got hypophosphatemia, because they go in a reverse direction, if the calcium is more, but phosphorus becomes less. With increased 24 hours urine calcium, that is more than 300 milligrams per. So taking all this, we are going to diagnose primary hyperparathyroidism. In other words, one is calcium is high, parathyroid hormone is increased, the serum phosphorus level is decreased, and urinary calcium. So with these biochemical changes in a suspected case, keep a possibility of primary hyperparathyroidism. Like I mentioned, this also will help to classify that patient into primary or secondary. Okay, all those values which I mentioned just now will depict hyperparathyroidism. Means calcium is more, parathyroid hormone is more. Okay, so is it primarily because of the gland disease or it is something else? So to differentiate between these two, then you have to evaluate like this. So if it is calcium is high and parathormone is high, it is primary. If calcium is low, or maybe normal, only the parathyroid hormone is decreased, secondary possibility, you have to keep it in mind. Tertiary, this serum phosphorus will be normal, and these two may be raised, that is calcium and parathyroid hormone. Tertiary is nothing but the persistence of secondary hyperparathyroidism. Just to keep it in mind, there are various causes for hypercalcemia. Ultimately, hyperparathyroidism results in hypercalcemia. So hypercalcemia, there are various causes. You need not remember all of these. Few of them we can remember. One is the primary hyperparathyroidism secondary to the parathyroid gland disease. Second, it could be a renal disease resulting, that is chronic renal failure resulting in hypercalcemia. In a malignant disease, there can be component of paraneoplastic syndrome, that is hypercalcemia secondary to metastatic disease of any malignancy. Metastatic disease in the skeletal system will result in hypercalcemia. Excessive vitamin D may result in hyper. So these are the few important points. If you remember these first four, that is more than enough. So one more slide just to show how to differentiate what all happens in normal and in abnormal cases. Like I mentioned, the normal calcium level, this is normal, what I mentioned. And in case of primary, this it is divided depending on the values. Depending on the values, it is divided: mild, moderate, and severe. Okay. Anything between 12 to 14 could be mild variety. More than 14, it is moderate, and anything more than 18, which is person may develop cardiac events. Okay. So at this level, we should be diagnosing the disease. If the calcium level is less than 8.5, that we take it as hypocalcemia. Anything more than 10.4, we take it as hypercalcemia. And normal level of parathyroid gland hormone is 10 to 60 picograms per ml. These values will be definitely asked in your competitive examinations. Just few words about secondary and tertiary, which I mentioned. Secondary, it is invariably because of the kidney disease, chronic renal failure, or malabsorption. So wherein the calcium may be normal or low, and parathyroid hormone will be elevated. Because the calcium level is low, the parathyroid gland gets stimulated and results in parathyroid hormone excessive secretion. That happens in chronic renal failure. Please remember, this also will be given as a case scenario during your competitive examination. They will give a scenario mentioning patient has got a renal disease so-and-so on dialysis. He comes with so-and-so, and investigation revealed normal calcium, parathyroid gland hormone is raised. So what is your likely diagnosis? Like that, they will give a scenario. The hyperparathyroidism, it's a diagnosis of imaging. Imaging play a very important role for diagnosis of hyperparathyroidism, because the system which is going to be affected in hyperparathyroidism is the skeletal system, that is demineralization. So once demineralization happens, it is a radiology which gives us the demineralitic or demineralized bones. So it is a diagnosis by imaging. Typically, this also will be given one of the X-ray film in your examination and then asked. It is a radial side, that is a lateral side of the middle phalanx of the digits, which go for osteoporosis or a resorption. This is called a resorption, where it doesn't exist, the bone doesn't exist. So it starts from the radial side. What is the reason? Honestly, I don't know, but it is on the radial side, which probably after the class, if I allow you to ask question, this is the question probably I may get from one of your students. So why exactly radials? Please mute your audios. Please mute your audios whenever I'm speaking. So it is a radial side which gets resolved, and it's a middle phalanx. Don't make me to search who is unmuted the video. Okay, otherwise it will be just delayed. And one more entity in this is there will be necrosis, or otherwise the tip of the distal phalanx will be like because of the osteoporosis or resorption, it will just disappear. That is called acro-osteolysis. Acro means periphery. Acral means periphery, most distal, periphery. So osteolysis means lysis of the bone. If you see this photograph, this is the typically the resorption or the osteolysis of the tip of the distal phalanx. So if these two simple X-ray of the hand, if these two are depicted in the X-ray of the hand, It is 99.9% that it is hyperparathyroidism. That is the importance of imaging. There are various other the radiological findings, which I am not going to deal in detail. Just I will mention few of the points because you may get these pictures in your examination and the questions may be asked. This is typically pepper salt appearance because of the osteolytic in the skull bone, pepper salt skull. These are the calcification. They are called metastatic calcification. There is one more type of calcification called a dystrophic calcification. Dystrophic calcification is a calcification in a dead tissue where parathyroid hormone levels and the calcium levels may be normal. That is typically seen in papillary carcinoma thyroid as psammoma bodies. The metastatic calcification occurs, the calcification in a normal tissue secondary to increased parathyroid hormone and increased calcium levels. If you see these two X-rays, typically over the wrist and typically here between the two phalanges in the thumb, in the two phalanges, there is a calcification. So these are called metastatic calcification. This also will be asked in your competitive examination. There is one more entity called brown tumor in case of primary hyperparathyroidism, wherein there will be in the maxilla. Typically it happens in the maxilla or in the long bones like cystic lesions. Because there is a osteoporosis or demineralization, this part of the bone becomes soft and there will be trabeculation in between and it gets enlarged, resulting in like a tumor. They are not actually tumors. It is not because of the overgrowth of the tumor cells. It is because of the bone cells. It is not because of the overgrowth. It is because of the demineralization. It becomes weak and there will be trabeculation in the middle, if you see here. So they are called brown tumors. They are not actually like other malignant tumors. This is one of the differential diagnoses for skeletal tumors. The next investigation for the diagnosis of hyperparathyroidism is once you have confirmed that yes, calcium is high, the parathyroid hormone is high, the phosphate levels are low, and urinary calcium is high. So you have labeled that yes, patient has got hyperparathyroidism. From where that parathyroid hormone is getting secreted, that you have to evaluate. So the first 4 items which I mentioned, they are for the diagnosis of in general hyperparathyroidism. The next remaining investigations are under the heading the remaining investigations which I am going to mention are to localize the gland. Like just now I heard there are some disturbance in the audio. So what is that disturbance in the audio made to me? In general, first we thought that there is disturbance in the video. That is, the tone was more. Other than my voice, there was an added voice. So that was hyperparathyroidism. To identify that from where that voice is coming, then we went into that chat box and we saw left side name and right side the audio, the design where it was unmuted and we had to mute it. Okay, what is that? That we could localize that from where that audio was coming. That was the culprit. So the next investigation in hyperparathyroidism, the initially by doing those 4 blood investigation, we labeled that it is hyperparathyroidism. Second is to localize from where, because there are 4 glands. Here we could identify which the audio, because there are 200 plus students listening to it. So out of 200, we cannot just like that we can. So just we went there and we could see that one audio is unmuted. That was our culprit. So like that, since there are 4 plus glands in the body and all of them can increase the parathyroid hormone and cause hyperparathyroidism. So our idea is, next idea is to find out which is the culprit gland. Because why we should identify? We need to punish that culprit gland. By what? In the form of removing that gland. So that is the idea. So that is why it is called to localize. It is to localize. So next investigation is to localize the gland. Out of 4, which is that gland, which is the culprit gland. So that is a localization. The one of the first, the easily available investigation may not be very informative, but easily available, so that you can, if you can get the information, it is of great use, is the USG of the neck. So in that, you may identify, for example, this is the thyroid lobe, and behind that, this upper is the thyroid. This is the thyroid gland. This is the thyroid gland, and below the thyroid gland, there is a hypoechoic nodule, hypoechoic behind the thyroid gland. So it has to be a parathyroid adenoma. So this is a simple investigation which will give us first information that yes, normally you can ask, if you ask me, are they normally parathyroid glands seen on USG? They are not seen. So anything like this, hypoechoic entity behind the thyroid lobe with raised calcium and parathyroid hormone, it has to be parathyroid adenoma unless otherwise proved. Okay, so this is one of the inexpensive, easily available, but it is a operator dependent. USG of the neck. One more important, when we do USG neck, like any other cases which we have mentioned in thyroid also, we can have a FNAC of that. So if you can put a needle into that and see under microscope, you'll be seeing parathyroid glands. Okay, so the pathologist may give a diagnosis that yes, it is a parathyroid adenoma. I'm going to mention one point now. Probably as far as my knowledge goes, this is the only area wherein from FNAC material, some biochemical investigations are done. The second line, which I mentioned here, this estimation of parathyroid hormone from FNAC material. From FNAC material, one of the important investigation. So you can estimate parathyroid hormone from FNA material, and that will give, it will add to the diagnosis. This will be asked as an competitive examination. What is the meaning of FNA-PTH? FNA-PTH. It is nothing but FNAC material doing parathyroid hormone estimation. Okay, so that will give information for the diagnosis. So this is one of the rapid investigation to find out from where the parathyroid hormone is getting released. I'll come back to CT later. The next, once you have found out on sonography that there is an enlarged parathyroid gland, next important investigation to localize parathyroid hormone or parathyroid gland is Sestamibi scan. Sestamibi scan. It is nothing but a radionuclide scan. Radionuclide scan. It's a type of radionuclide scan. Sestamibi is an agent. So when it is given, it is taken up by both thyroid and parathyroid glands. Since thyroid has got lot of blood supply, after giving, in the beginning of the image, both thyroid and parathyroid glands take up the agent. So once there is a lot of blood supply to the thyroid and it is washed away, that is after 2.5 hours, if you rescan the patient, only parathyroid is remained here, because the agent in the thyroid is washed out. Okay, so this culprit gland can be depicted. So Sestamibi scan is a diagnostic imaging or a radionuclide scan for parathyroid adenoma detection. If you combine this USG with Sestamibi, the diagnosis, the percentage, almost 90% of the cases you can diagnose. If you do it alone, they are around 80% each. So always it is better to have a sonography plus Sestamibi scan for the diagnosis of parathyroid adenoma. Next comes angiography. Angiography means, what do? It is a selective angiography. They go through the femoral artery, through the heart, into the carotid area, then the external carotid artery, they inject the dye. Because I mentioned in my first class, almost all the parathyroid glands are supplied by inferior thyroid artery. Inferior thyroid artery, because of their anatomical location. So once you inject the dye there, it will go into the arterial system, then it will be drained into the venous system. Majority of the venous drainage of the parathyroid glands is into the inferior thyroid vein, which is the biggest vein. So the blood is aspirated. If you see in this photograph, angiography, the arterial phase of this, there will be increased blood flow in one of the areas, indicating probably there is a culprit gland there. Okay, so once you are diagnosed this, during the venous phase, blood is drawn under two-plex scan from that, and the hormone is estimated. That is called selective venous sampling. Selective, this also will be asked for your examination. This is called selective venous sampling of parathyroid hormone. This almost give 99.9% diagnosis of parathyroid hormone, adenoma or hyperparathyroidism. Next is this CT angiogram. What I have mentioned is just CT. This is not routinely done in all primary adenomas. Okay, I have mentioned here few indications. It is done in the recurrent disease or a persistent hypercalcemia, or whenever there is a re-exploration. The first surgery is insufficient, you have planned for re-exploration, or if you are suspecting a malignancy, then angiography is indicated. Otherwise, routinely in all the cases, as a virgin case, when the patient primarily presents, we have a diagnosis with ultrasound sestamide scan with biochemical markers. That is more than enough for the diagnosis. The CT chest, contrast CT chest, in all the cases, it is not really required. It is not really required. Again, this is required for a recurrent disease, or you have planned for re-exploration, or you are suspecting cancer, parathyroid cancer with a metastatic disease. Then the CT is advisable. So for primarily for the diagnosis, those four elements of blood investigation, then comes USG neck with or without FNAC, then comes sestamide scan. So if you write in your theory examination, this investigation, that is more than enough. Again, this is to combine. If you combine out of 4, 2, 3, the result of finding out the culprit gland increases. Once it has been diagnosed that yes, you have got a primary hyperparathyroidism affecting one of the glands. Once you have diagnosed that and you know that which is the culprit gland, the treatment is surgical. In surgical, treatment is surgical, I said. Here there are options. First, you are diagnosed that it is a hyperparathyroidism. Second, you find out the culprit gland. This culprit gland needs to be removed. That we call it as parathyroidectomy. Parathyroidectomy. If you know the gland, culprit gland, you have to go to that particular gland and remove that, parathyroidectomy. Sometimes earlier, when there were no many investigations to localize the gland, people used to do a neck exploration just like that. Explore all the 4 glands and remove 3/4 of the all 3 complete glands and remaining 3/4 of the one more gland and close it. That's what the people used to do. But nowadays, because we have investigation to localize the diseased gland, we do this. And this is being done by open method. Second, by minimal invasive method. Third, by endoscopic method. Whatever the method you have done, removing the gland, there are two things which we don't practice in other surgical treatments. Like for example, see a breast. You know, right breast is diseased, we remove it. We don't confirm after removing the breast that we have removed the diseased breast. We confirm before only. But in parathyroid, because the glands are small, and the glands are situated deep in the neck, and glands can be mistaken for a surrounding fat tissue. And the motto of the surgery is to remove only the culprit gland, not the normal glands. That is the motto or the aim of the surgery. So because it has got these background points, in case of parathyroidectomy, there are two things. One, we should remove only the diseased gland. Second, there is an added work, that is confirm after surgery that you have removed the culprit gland. You understood? Not many areas in the human body we do this. We do everything pre-op only. Then we take out. We don't try doing something after removing. But in this scenario, in parathyroid gland, because of the reasons which I mentioned, so it has to be confirmed after doing surgery that yes, you have removed the culprit gland and remaining glands are normal. What is left in the neck? That is an added work in parathyroid surgery. That is why parathyroid surgeries are not done by many people. It has to be done in expertise and see that the first surgery is the best surgery what is being done. And only the culprit person or a culprit gland should be punished, not the innocent remaining glands. Like I mentioned, there are a few things. First thing, whatever I mentioned to the previous slide, please remember, don't forget that. Now I am coming back to the point which I mentioned just now. We should confirm that yes, you have removed the culprit gland. For that, there is a procedure. What we do before we start the surgery, draw blood sample for parathyroid hormone estimation. Then do the surgery. Then after removing around 5 to 10 minutes, do again the parathyroid hormone in the peripheral blood. What I'm talking in the peripheral blood. If you have removed the culprit gland, the 50% of that basal values parathyroid hormone should be lesser than the first values. You understood? So here you are confirming on table itself. So once you have put the position of the patient, you draw blood sample, get parathyroid hormone assay done, estimation done, start the surgery, do surgery, and after 5 to 10 minutes after removing, again send one more sample and compare the first sample with this sample. There should be reduction at least by 50%. Please remember, this is both for knowledge as well as for your competitive examinations. So once it comes 50% of the original value means you have removed the correct gland or a pathological gland or the culprit gland. Okay, that is one. Second, there is one instrument where along with the radio guided parathyroidectomy, in the sense what they do, once the specimen is removed, they must have given radionuclide agent before surgery. That radionuclide agent will be within the gland which you have removed. That removed gland will be placed on the trolley, and this probe is kept on that gland, and this will read the radionuclide entity in that gland. So if it is a real gland, pathological gland, if you are removed, this will give a reading. This will give a reading that it will have a high radiation, because whatever the radionuclide you have given, it is taken up by the parathyroid gland. So you are removed and that will show. This is the one which is most practiced on Western side. In fact, they place this in the OT itself. There are surgeons called parathyroid surgeons. There is a one of the in Western, in London, I don't know what exactly the name. There is a center called a parathyroid surgery center. Almost they do around 50 to 100 cases every day, and they have placed this in the OT itself. Once the gland is removed, the nurse will keep this probe on the removed gland and the machine will read, and then the surgeon will close the wound. This is what it is practiced. Coming to a few of the procedures, what is being done, like I said, minimally invasive. So this is the small incision which is taken in the middle of the neck. This is the sternocleidomastoid on either side here. These are the two sternocleidomastoid. This is the suprasternal notch and 3 centimeter incision. Then it is exposed, platysma is cut, then gland is exposed. And this is the thyroid lobe, and this is the parathyroid gland, which is removed. So since you have localized by investigation, straight away you can go there. If system scan has shown that it is the right lower parathyroid, straight away you can expose the right lower lobe of the thyroid and look for that adenoma behind that, like here. Okay, it's because you have imaging, pre-op imaging, it is easy to diagnose and find out what is the gland, and you can remove. Post-operative complications, persistent hypercalcemia. Why persistent? Because you have not removed the culprit gland. So person continues to have hypercalcemia in the post-operative period. The incidence is around 1 to 20%. They can, if it is practiced, that removal of all the 4 glands, that is called permanent hypocalcemia, which is not practiced nowadays. Okay, there can be injury to the recurrent laryngeal nerve or external laryngeal nerve, and there can be bleeding, not very important. There is an entity called revision parathyroidectomy. Means because the person has got a persistent hypercalcemia, then you have to go back and do it. There are 2 entities which you should know, which can be asked in the examination. One is persistent hyperparathyroidism, means hypercalcemia within 6 months of surgery. It is not very next day, up to 6 months. If the hypercalcemia is persistent, that is called persistent hyperparathyroidism. It is called recurrent if the person develops those features of hypercalcemia after 6 months. That is called recurrent. So these are the definitions of persistent and recurrent. The causes for recurrence, probably in the first surgery, you have not removed the culprit gland. So probably missed that first operation, that affected gland is missed. Or there can be a hyperplasia of the remaining glands. Hyperplasia of the remaining glands. So that also may result in hypercalcemia. Or you have removed the correct gland, but the next gland probably must have developed adenoma, development of second adenomas. And one more last entity, it is called parathyromatosis. This also you will have the questions. This is ultimately, I don't know in your competitive examination what is clinically not very important. You will have a lot of questions. I don't know what knowledge they are going to assess, but you need to be prepared for that. You cannot question them. So parathyromatosis means what? It is like there are another 2-3 similes which I'll tell, which you must have heard in gynecology, endometriosis. Endometriosis. In surgical specialty, lipomatosis. Then hydatidosis. Hydatidosis. Okay. Means what? Whenever we are doing surgery on a parathyroid adenoma, if there is spillage of this tissue into the surrounding areas or into the intramuscular system, then each one of them start growing. That results in parathyromatoses, like endometriosis, endometrial tissue in the pelvis, lipomatosis, like diffuse lipoma tissue in the retroperitoneum, hydatidosis, spillage of hydrated tissue into the peritoneal cavity results in hydatidosis. Okay, so like that, there is a one more entity in surgical, splenectosis. Means if there is a case of splenectomy, if there is a spillage of splenic tissue into the peritoneal cavity, that will start growing. That is called splenectosis. Means whenever the tissue spillage is there, that tissue will get a blood supply from the surrounding and it starts growing. These are the entities. Please remember all these of them. You cannot get at a single place. Please remember, these are the entities. They start growing. They start growing themselves because they get a nutrition from the surrounding area. There is an entity called parathyroid crisis, like I mentioned in the beginning, when there is a severe hypercalcemia. If the calcium is more than 12.5 milligram %, person will have all of these symptomatology. So they need to be admitted in ICU and needs to be treated. They can have a cardiac arrhythmia, they can have hypotension, acute renal failure, severe dehydration. Okay, so that is one of the emergencies. I'll be showing few of the 1 or 2 videos just for your information. It is just to know, just to have a knowledge, there is something called like this. You need not know everything, just to understand. Yes, there can be something like this. It's a very simple procedure, provided you know where exactly is the gland. I wanted to show you the gland and the fatty tissue. At that point, just see there. Once the gland is exposed and try removing, you can see there is a surrounding fat. So it is really important to understand the difference between the gland, which is little pink, or what I said golden yellow, versus the remaining fat. See, around that there is a fat. So there are many instances where a surgeon can remove only the fat, thinking that he has removed parathyroid gland or adenoma. Like I mentioned, parathyroidectomy also can be done endoscopically. Endoscopically means we create a space, like a laparoscopic surgery in the abdomen. We create a space and put small hand instruments into that space and then try to remove the gland. It is applicable both for thyroid and parathyroid. And going into the neck, there are various routes. If you really want to enter into the neck through neck itself, it is difficult because you have a longer instruments. So putting longer instruments here itself and operating is difficult. So you have to go a little far away from the neck and then try to reach the neck, that is a gland proper, with the tip of the instruments. Okay, so that is the idea. Means what? You can approach this neck, what is the area of the interest, from a distance. This is done either over the lower chest or from the axilla, or nowadays they do it through mouth. So the approach to thyroid and parathyroid in endoscopic surgery is commonest through axilla, chest, and through the mouth. This is one of the videos which I have shown entering in through axilla. So this is one of the procedure which I was mentioning. Usually it is followed axillary. Here difficult to put the instruments. So this is one of the videos showing transcervical. Through the neck also you can enter. But commonly practiced is transaxillary. Just to now to conclude, first you should understand what is primary hyperparathyroidism, wherein the glands are involved. Diagnosis is done by increased calcium levels, increased parathyroid hormone levels, then decreased phosphorus, increased urinary calcium. Third, to localize is a USG with Doppler, which I did not mention, which will show us the blood supply to the parathyroid or a duplex scan. Then Systam scan. Then confirmation of diagnosis and the treatment. This is the area where we need to confirm that you are treated correctly. Okay. So these are the final points regarding primary hyperparathyroidism. So I hope I have made it very simple and very crystal clear for all of you for easy understanding. So you may have a short note or you may have definitely some questions on this during your competitive examinations. If anyone has any clarification, any doubts, we'll be able to answer for another 1 or 2 minutes. or you can put, yeah, I just, there are some, does system scan light up even normal parathyroid gland? I don't know, full name is not there, Bharat. Okay. See, normally what happens, we don't ask for system scan normally whenever we are doing some scan for the thyroid diseases. Okay. So there is no question of giving this agent, whenever you are not suspecting parathyroid diseases. In thyroid diseases, like I mentioned in the previous class, we use different agent, technetium and I-123 and I-131. They are taken up exclusively by the thyroid because we are evaluating the thyroid diseases. So if you are evaluating parathyroid diseases, it is an overacting gland which will take more nuclear agent. That is why that is depicted. Once it is taken up by the overacting gland, the remaining parathyroid gland, they get suppressed. That is why they are not visualized. So it is only the overacting gland which takes up the agent. Sir, do the brown tumor and metastatic calcification reverse upon normalizing the calcium levels, or do they need separate treatment? Yeah, good question. Definitely, once you treat, this is the specialty of primary hyperparathyroidism. All the symptomatology, whatever the bone changes are there, they will come back to normal once you treat the disease. They need not require a separate treatment unless the person has got a fracture. So definitely they don't require. So treat this at the best in the first instances and a person becomes absolutely normal. Parathyroidoptosis is only for parathyroid or not happen. This, whenever there is a spillage of gland, that gland sitting there and growing doesn't happen in all the solid organs. For example, liver, it doesn't happen, but spleen, it happens. Reason, I don't know what is the reason, but there are specific areas like endometrial tissue, splenic tissue, hydrated germinal layer, and parathyroid tissue. They start growing. What is the reason? I don't know. Anything else? Okay. Thank you all. Yeah, parathyroid crisis results in hypotension. This hypotension, it could be because of dehydration or it could be because of the cardiac involvement. Both can cause hypotension. That is why the dictum is, whenever you have a hypotension in any given case, rule out cardiac cause first. Because hypotension, we initiate treating hypotension by giving intravascular volume in the form of IV fluids. If hypotension, that hypotension is because of the cardiac cause, and if you treat that hypotension by giving IV fluids, you are going to worsen the condition. So whenever there is a mix-up of hypotension secondary to cardiac cause and a peripheral cause, rule out cardiac cause first, and then start treating the patient with fluids. Okay, like I mentioned, all of you should go back and read the books which I mentioned and try to know. It will be more interesting. Do fractures, bone pain occur due to bone? Yeah, definitely. It is because of bone resorption that becomes weak. That is why there is pain and sometimes trabeculation and cyst formation, that we call it as brown tumor. And then there can be fractures also if it is a weight bearing bone. Okay. Thank you.